Iran just made the entire world hold its breath. And right now, President Trump is waiting on a letter that could either bring peace to the Middle East or push things into a direction nobody wants to think about. Let's talk about what is really happening here, because most people are only catching the headlines and missing the bigger picture entirely. Right now, as of this weekend, the United States and Iran are in a standoff that is unlike anything we have seen in decades. There is a fragile ceasefire holding, barely, after the United States struck 2 Iranian sites just days ago. The United Arab Emirates confirmed it had to shoot down incoming Iranian missiles and drones. Think about that for a second. We are talking about active military exchanges between American forces and Iran, and at the same time, diplomats are sitting in rooms trying to put together a peace deal. That tension, that contradiction, is exactly what makes this moment so significant. Here's what is really happening at the core of all of this. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow stretch of water that you might not think about in your daily life, is sitting at the center of a global economic crisis. About 20% of the world's oil shipping flows through that strait. 20%. When that waterway is disrupted, the effects ripple out across every country on Earth. Fuel prices, shipping costs, supply chains, all of it gets touched. And right now, Iran effectively closed that strait after the outbreak of war on February 28th. And the consequences have been felt worldwide ever since. President Trump responded to that closure with a blockade announcement on April 12th, sending American destroyers into the region to search for Iranian mines and position themselves to escort commercial ships through the waterway. That operation was given a name, Project Freedom. And Trump made clear this weekend that if peace talks fall apart, Project Freedom is coming back, and not just in its original form. He told reporters directly, "We may go back to Project Freedom if things don't happen, but it'd be Project Freedom Plus," meaning Project Freedom plus other things. When Trump says plus other things, the entire world listens very carefully because that phrase carries weight. Now, here is where the story gets even more layered. While Trump was waiting on this letter from Iran, he told reporters Friday evening, "I'm getting a letter supposedly tonight, so we'll see how that goes." The diplomatic activity happening behind the scenes was moving fast. Secretary of State Marco Rubio sat down in Miami with White House envoy Steve Witkoff and Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani. Qatar has been playing a quiet but critical role in these negotiations, acting as a back channel between Washington and Tehran. The fact that Rubio himself was in that room alongside Witkoff signals just how seriously the United States is treating this moment. Rubio made his position clear. He is hoping Iran's response turns out to be a serious offer. That language matters. A serious offer implies that there is real concern Tehran might respond with something that is not serious, something designed to buy time, delay the process, or shift pressure back onto the United States without actually moving toward resolution. Let's break down what each side actually wants, because this is where the real story lives. Iran's proposal, according to what has been reported, includes several demands that the United States would find extremely difficult to accept. Tehran wants a formal guarantee that it will not face future attacks. It wants American forces withdrawn from the region. It wants its frozen assets released. It wants U.S. sanctions lifted. And on top of all of that, Iran has reportedly been seeking war reparations, an end to attacks on Hezbollah allies in Lebanon, and a completely new mechanism for managing the Strait of Hormuz. Read that list again slowly. That is not a peace proposal from a country that feels it is losing. That reads like a list of demands from a side that believes it holds leverage. Whether that leverage is real or perceived is the key question hanging over these talks. The United States countered with something very different. Washington's proposal requires Iran to halt nuclear enrichment activities for 12 years, hand over its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, and accept a gradual lifting of sanctions alongside an end to the U.S. blockade. The strait would reopen within 30 days under this framework. Negotiators have been working through what is being described as a 14-point framework, a one-page memorandum of understanding that would serve as the foundation for a broader treaty to be negotiated later. One page for a conflict involving nuclear weapons, oil shipping, military strikes, and the balance of power across the entire Middle East. Every single word on that page carries enormous consequences, and the sticking points are significant. The biggest one? Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium. The question of what happens to that uranium, whether Tehran hands it over, how much gets removed, what verification looks like, is proving to be one of the hardest gaps to bridge. And then there is the question of whether Iran would ever be allowed to resume any nuclear enrichment activity in the future. Tehran has been clear that it views enrichment as a sovereign right. The United States and its allies view unchecked Iranian enrichment as an existential threat. Those two positions are not easy to reconcile, and yet diplomats are trying. But what happened next is where things get more complicated. While these peace talks were ongoing, U.S. Central Command did not slow down its military operations. American forces disabled 2 Iranian tankers that were attempting to make their way through the U.S.-imposed blockade of the Strait. Central Command posted video of the ships with their smokestacks smoldering. And by Saturday, the United States announced it had redirected 58 commercial vessels and disabled 4 of them since April 13th, all to prevent them from entering or leaving Iranian ports. Iran's foreign minister, Sayed Abbas Araghchi, took to social media and made his frustration very public. He wrote that every time a diplomatic solution is on the table, the U.S. opts for a reckless military adventure. Is it a crude pressure tactic? That statement is interesting for a couple of reasons. On one hand, it sounds like a complaint. On the other hand, it is a question. And questions in diplomacy sometimes leave a door open. Is it a pressure tactic? Almost certainly, yes. The United States has consistently paired its diplomatic outreach with continued enforcement of the blockade. The message being sent is clear. The pressure does not stop until there is a deal, and the terms of that deal need to meet American requirements. Whether that strategy pushes Iran toward the table or pushes them away is something only the next few days will reveal. Now let's zoom out and look at who else is moving pieces on this board, because the United States is not acting alone here, and that development is worth paying close attention to. Britain's defense ministry announced this weekend that it is sending the HMS Dragon to the Middle East from the eastern Mediterranean, where it had been defending British assets from the threat of Iranian strikes. A UK military spokesperson described it as prudent planning and confirmed it is part of a multinational coalition jointly led by the United Kingdom and France, with the goal of securing the Strait of Hormuz when conditions allow. France moved earlier this week, deploying its carrier strike group to the southern Red Sea, accompanied by Italian and Dutch warships. French President Emmanuel Macron made his position known publicly, saying a joint mission with the UK could help restore confidence among shipowners and insurers, and was distinct from the parties to the conflict. He also called on all sides to end the blockades of the Strait immediately and without conditions. That last part, the call to end blockades immediately and without conditions, is a subtle but real point of tension between Washington and its European allies. The United States has its own strategic interests in maintaining pressure through the blockade until a satisfactory deal is reached. France's call for an immediate end without conditions does not align perfectly with that approach. These are allies, but they do not have identical interests. What this tells us is that the pressure is coming from multiple directions simultaneously. Iran is feeling it from the U.S. military presence, from the blockade cutting off its tankers, from European naval deployments converging on the region, and from diplomatic back channels pushing for a response. At the same time, the United States is managing relationships with European partners who want the Strait open and are not willing to wait indefinitely. Most people miss this part of the story when you have American destroyers enforcing a blockade, British and French warships moving into position, and Gulf states like the UAE actively shooting down Iranian projectiles. The scale of what is happening here goes far beyond a bilateral dispute between Washington and Tehran. This is a multi-actor situation where the decisions made in the next few days will have consequences for global energy markets, military alliances, and the future of nuclear negotiations in the region. The 14-point framework being hammered out is not just about Iran and the United States. It is about what the rules of the international order look like going forward. If a deal gets done, it sets a precedent for how military and economic pressure can produce diplomatic results. If talks collapse, the fallout would hit shipping lanes, oil prices, and the stability of a region that sits at the crossroads of 3 continents. And then there is the nuclear dimension, which cannot be overstated. The demand that Iran halt enrichment for 12 years and surrender its highly enriched uranium is not simply a negotiating chip. It reflects a fundamental strategic concern. that a nuclear-armed Iran would permanently alter the power structure of the Middle East in ways that would be extraordinarily difficult to reverse. Every country in the region understands this. Saudi Arabia understands it. Israel, even though it is not directly at the table, understands it. The European nations now sailing warships toward the Strait understand it. What makes this moment so genuinely consequential is that there is a real scenario where a deal gets done. There is also a real scenario where it falls apart. And the consequences of each outcome are so dramatically different that the world is watching every signal coming out of Tehran with extraordinary attention. Trump said Friday he was expecting a letter from Iran that night. The question of what that letter contains, whether it represents a serious counteroffer, a stalling tactic, or something else entirely, is the hinge point of this entire situation. If Iran comes back with something the U.S. can work with, the 14-point framework moves forward. Negotiations continue. There is a path toward reopening the Strait, lifting sanctions gradually, and avoiding a broader military escalation. If Iran's response is not serious, if it is designed to delay or to reset the pressure dynamics without actually moving toward resolution, then Project Freedom Plus becomes the next chapter of this story. And the plus in that equation is the part that no one should take lightly. Secretary Rubio, sitting in Miami with Steve Witkoff and a Qatari prime minister, tells you something about how urgent this moment feels inside the administration. These are not low-level staffers working through talking points. This is the Secretary of State personally engaged in the process over a weekend, working through a Qatari channel that has been critical to keeping lines of communication open between Washington and Tehran. Qatar's role here deserves a moment of attention. Doha has maintained relationships with Iran even while hosting one of the largest U.S. military presences in the region. That dual positioning makes Qatar uniquely valuable as a mediator, a country that can carry messages between two sides that are not, at this moment, speaking directly in any formal capacity. When Rubio meets with the Qatari prime minister in Miami, what is really happening is the U.S. is getting a read on how Tehran is thinking and what the realistic contours of a deal might look like. That conversation shapes what Washington accepts, rejects, or pushes back on. Here is the big picture. The world has not seen a confrontation of this scale in the Middle East in a long time. The combination of military strikes, naval blockades, multi-nation naval deployments, active ceasefire management, and nuclear negotiations all happening simultaneously, it creates a kind of pressure that is unlike a typical diplomatic standoff. And yet deals do get made in moments like this. History has shown that the most intense pressure sometimes produces the most unexpected agreements. The question is whether both sides see more to gain from a deal than from continued confrontation. For the United States, a deal that rolls back Iran's nuclear program for 12 years and reopens the Strait is a significant strategic win. For Iran, a deal that lifts sanctions and releases frozen assets provides economic relief that the country badly needs after years of pressure. Whether Tehran calculates that the terms on offer are acceptable, or whether the leadership decides that sovereignty and resistance matter more than economic relief, is a decision being made right now in those rooms in Iran by people we are not hearing from publicly. So the real question now is this: when Trump finally opens that letter from Tehran, what does it say? And does it give diplomacy a real chance, or does it set the stage for the next escalation?